Perfect. Well, let's just get started. Assuming all the attendees can see in here, which is good. So perfect. All right, it's now 7:05. Date September 25th. I'll call to order the meeting of the Milton School Building Committee. Just process everything by roll call attendance. With me in the room is Glenn Hoffman. Here, sorry. Carrie Hurley.
Here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there we go. Okay.
Acknowledgement.
Dr. Miranda. There.
Yes, hi, here.
Sorry, awkward still with the hybrid. Mark Loring.
Here.
And Mike Zulis.
Present.
Perfect. So second thing on our agenda is citizen speak. We attribute the first 15 minutes of our meeting for any citizen that wants to speak. We ask that you raise your hand, state your name and address, and then also limit your commentary or speaking to 3 minutes. So give it a minute, look for any hands that raise for this, and then if we see none, we'll move on. Seeing none. All right, perfect. We'll move on to our third agenda item, which is approval of our previous minutes that were distributed. So just see if there's any questions, comments, edits to those minutes. So hearing none, motion by anyone to approve minutes?
Motion to approve minutes.
Let's,
To abstain.
yeah, that's the other one too. We might, mainly due to the people that, I think, if you weren't present at the last meeting, we can't approve them, so.
Good point.
Good point, so.
But he can still make the motion and abstentions don't count as no's, so we can still pass them.
Okay. Okay, so.
I'll second his motion.
All right,
I think I was the last meeting I was remote.
it had you listed as there.
Okay.
So Glenn, Mark, seconded. Yeah, Glenn, how are you?
Yeah.
So we just fill you in, we just made a motion to approve the previous minutes.
Okay.
So just seeing it before, motion was made and seconded, so we're in discussion. So didn't see if you have any comments or anything like that. No comments. Thank you. Any other discussion or commentary from members?
John, I'm trying to pull up the minutes. Was I at that meeting?
I don't believe
No.
you were at our last
Okay.
meeting.
All right.
All right, so hearing no discussion, we'll go by a roll call vote. Glenn?
Yes.
Glenn Hoffman, yes. Aqua?
Yes.
Carrie?
I'm abstaining.
Abstaining. Mike Zulis?
I'll abstain.
Yeah. Dr. Miranda?
Yes.
Yeah. And Mark Loring?
Yes.
And myself, yes. All right. Next thing on our agenda are items under old business. So probably I'm going to take one out of order if everyone's okay with that. Currently, we had the OPM discussion first, but I think probably just to give an overview of all the other topics that come below it is basically just look over the project timeline and kind of where we're at overall. And that will help kind of fill in some of the other ones if everyone's okay with that. A lot of nodding heads. Perfect. I'm gonna share my screen. Got to Zoom. Share. Seeing if anybody else is in the. All right, so September 25th, EEA discussions. Just for everybody knows, we had a meeting with the EEA last week, so we can touch on that a little bit. So these items that we're looking at on here for meetings with the EEA, we've kind of touched on those last week. The alternative analysis, again, we can talk about that later on. I submitted that to everybody over the weekend, so they have the draft copy of that we'll be issuing. The special legislation, we've got copies of that kind of distributed to the members that came in from town council a couple weeks ago. And then appraisals, we'll talk about that, but the requests for services for appraisals are out there. They're due back in a couple weeks, and then once we get those executed, we can start, working on the appraisals portion of it. The OPM timeline that we have there, questions were due on the 21st. We've got all questions in. We're issuing an addendum, which is basically responses to the questions. Nothing came in that was show-stopping or, really too much, so it was good. So those comments are going out. The subcommittee for the OPMs are gonna start their work essentially next week. The OPM responses to the request for services are due at the end of this week. So the good news is we'll have that stuff in hand come Friday, and then come Monday, that subcommittee can start working on that stuff. So, just short, quick and short on the overall schedule. We're on progress kind of for all our topics that we're gonna talk about, going forward. So as far as the schedule or anything like that, just look around, see if anybody has any questions or comments, or we can just save it as we dive into each one of these. Perfect. Stop sharing. All right, so what we'll do next is talk about item 4A, which is OPM request for services for Gowell Road. So as I mentioned, we had the site walk with the OPMs 2 weeks ago. Mark Loring and Tim Lombard were gracious enough to participate in that with the OPMs, and then also Town Administrator Nick Milano. Mark, could you just give a brief summary of those site walks?
Yeah, certainly. I'll flag. I also can't undo my video.
Oh,
Sean has something against us beautiful people here, Mike and Selena. So site walkthrough, again, as Tim, myself were there, although really all credit needs to go to Nick Milano, who ran it. Colin was also there and helped in good ways. So about 20 different OPMs seem to show up, and obviously the full list, I believe, is shared with the kind of as an addendum, along with answers to any questions that came through. So again, Nick provided a overview of kind of the history, background of the project, location, site conditions, all those types of things. There were not very many questions from the OPMs there, which again, a credit to Nick's great general presentation. There were some questions, all the questions were within that document that are being sent out, but it was around like, what is the support for the school building project? What is the, general timeline, questions about the flags. So nothing that's significant. There was just, again, really what I took as strong representation at, most walkthroughs I go to. If you get a handful of people, you're feeling pretty good. So we had about 20 folks, feel really good about our ability to get a strong and competitive, very qualified and competitive company to do the work.
Thanks, Mark. So, the process by which we're selecting the OPM, again, just covering it for, members that might not have been here. Our anticipation is there'll be more than 3 OPMs that submit. So there was a grading criteria that was issued as part of the RFS that gave a possible score out of 100 for the OPM on different criteria. So the subcommittee that was formed at our last meeting, which represents 4 members of the school building committee and then 4 members of town, will basically create that short list by grading each proposal that comes in. And then based on the highest grade or the 3 highest grades, those will move on to the overall school building committee. Once they move on to us, we'll conduct for lack of a better word, formal interviews, question and answers, and there'll be a little more participation from every member of the school building committee. So with that, just again, see if there's any questions or commentary from anyone. I'll keep an eye online because I miss I miss the people online. Sometimes it's easier in person. All right. Not seeing any. All right. Perfect. The next one we had essentially item 4B for old business and update is the architectural services for Gow Roads. So this will tie into a couple others. So currently right now, we've got the process started for onboarding an OPM to assist us with some of the managerial tasks that we're gonna have over the next few months. The architectural end of it, we need to think about, mentioned it in multiple meetings, is to look at the site that we have and further define the building, the program and stuff, other portions of the design to allow us to get to a better number. So when we ask for funding for the overall project, we have a better idea of what that is. So part of what I've been working on or trying to come up with is look at our current funding that we have and see how, you know, that funds us for the required work that we have to do over the duration, essentially until we could get additional funding. So, you know, with those things, the process to onboard an architect right now, for example, using the OPM one, takes about 8 weeks. So for us, we need to start thinking about when we want an architect on board and then work backwards to kind of get to that initial phase of creating the RFS, developing a scope of work, issuing it out publicly, and then basically follow a similar path along there.
Sean, to be clear, this
Yep.
is for pre-design services, the architectural, correct?
It would be for pre-design services and then potentially augment the contract for final design services. So essentially the architect that we would pick as part of that, the envisionment is they would be the architect for the overall final project.
You don't have to put that out public first.
It would be out public.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. So the work that we had,
Well, I guess that's my question. We're hiring an architect for pre-design. We have to put it back in the street for architectural services after the fact.
I don't, it depends how we write the contract. So if the contract, I think, and Nick's working on that,
Okay.
if the contract's written that it
That
potentially.
may have changed. When I did schools, you
Yeah.
had to publicly bid
And they-
design services.
And they will be publicly, so the initial one that's going on would be basically be follow designer selection committee for it. So it very similar to what we're doing for the OPM.
Okay.
It would be a public process by which we issue an RFS. Multiple firms can
So the
respond.
OPM wouldn't be part of the architectural selection process.
At this point, not right
Okay.
now. They potentially could be when we onboard them, but right now, I'm not envisioning.
Again, it's been about 10 years, so it's schools, that used to be a requirement that the OPM was on board prior to selecting the architect for design services.
Under MSBA or under?
Yes, under MSBA.
Exactly. So if we go under MSBA, we will restart this process separately. So this is assuming that we're not getting MSBA funding.
Okay.
So again, we're kind of outside of the realm of MSBA for that operation that we're doing. So that allows
So
us.
that clarifies it.
Yeah, so that allows us to do that. If we go under MSBA, we have to go through their designer selection committee, which is made up of a number of independent consultants and 3 representatives of the town. And we would repick an OPM and repick the architect along the same lines.
What
Yes,
would we lose if we pretended that we're going to follow, that we're going to get the money and just follow that trend? Would we lose anything significantly by assuming that we do the right, we follow the MSBA process so that if we get it, we don't have to repeat this?
Yeah, so if we get selected to MSBA,
Yes.
we will have to repeat
Yeah,
this,
we'll have to start
because
over.
what happens is, it's a
Doesn't
whole,
matter if we follow the process.
correct,
Okay.
because they have their own designer selection committee that is made up of their appointed representatives,
MSBA.
correct? And then they allow 3 people from the town, so it's a mixture. But we would go back and redo that, so
does our contract for the current OPM selection envisage that we may have to kind this whole process?
Correct.
Okay.
It does. We made them aware. Those are some of the questions that came up too, of, you know, what is our process, you know, by which if we get selected MSBA, what will we do? And essentially at that point, it would be termination of that contract. And then, you know, that's why part of this initial work that we're doing, like when we look at the funding that we have 275,000.
Yeah.
The overall, if you go with MSBA, the overall cost for design and engineering is gonna be about 8 to 10 million. So we're in a very small, minute fraction of a percent of what we're gonna have to spend for the whole thing. And I think, you know, the questions that we've seen come in by understanding what we have for funding right now and what our ask is, I think they understand it's just an initial thing to kind of get on the phone.
Thank you.
No problem. So on the architectural services one, you know, after my view of it is we'll have a contract for an OPM. We're gonna onboard them with specific tasks that we want them to look at, that we can talk about. And then the remainder of the funding that's there, we have to look at and figure out for the ask or what we're gonna ask an architect to do. Can we work within that ability or availability of funding that we have as a remainder? And then look at the duration of what we're asking them to do, essentially between now and when we get our next funding source. So,
The last time I
Yes,
brought
sir.
this, when we asked for the 275, I think we were very specific on what we were going to use it for. Would it make sense to ensure that at least we've made progress on those items that we request?
yeah, so the things that we asked under Article 33
Yeah.
for it was OPM,
Okay.
was architect, traffic,
Yeah.
geotechnical, and I believe stormwater analysis that's there. So, you know, when we start thinking about them, there's possibility that, you know, if we don't think the funding that we can, and this is part of the discussion I want to have with everybody of like, if we don't think the funding that we have is enough to get an architect to get us to where we need to be, do we want to break off and look at some of those other subcomponents that we listed there, stormwater analysis, traffic, and hold on the architect till we get a bunch of money, and then do those kind of portions? The problem, the only one I see that we could really tackle without having a program for a building, would be traffic, you know, from a macro level around town, moving kids around and seeing what bus routes, how we could reconfigure that stuff. Stormwater analysis, we kind of need a program of what the building looks like. Like we have a conceptual one,
Yeah.
but if we run with that and then things change later on, we have to redo all that again. So the stormwater one kind of comes after a building's really defined on what we're gonna do. Geotech, I think was thrown in there in case we had to do borings or anything for soil samples for what the foundation conditions would be. That could be one that we do, but I know there was some questions or points to the article when we did that we wouldn't be disturbing the land. I think it was a petition or amendment to the article that was made at town meeting. So I'm not sure we'd be able to do much geotech work, you know, to get a rigger in there. But those are the type of things I want to discuss, you know, with everyone. But as far, you know, to your point, you know, for the funding that we got, the main ones were the architect and the OPM. So getting the OPM on board, we check a box. If we get the architect or other services on there, we can check a box. And, you know, that would basically align with the request that we did for the funding. So we've used that funding for exactly what we asked it for.
I asked mainly for stormwater. My former constituents were very adamant on that. So I need to have reason. If we're not going to start the study, I need to know, I need to be able to tell the story.
Yep.
So what you've shared really helps. We cannot look at stormwater until we know exactly what we're building, because it would impact it. Even if we do a stormwater analysis now, we'll have to do it again.
Yeah.
That's the story, right? That's the truth.
Basically, yeah. I mean, we could do one right now and look at what we have there, but again, and that would be us for a committee to decide if the area, if, for example, we onboard an architect, we do a stormwater analysis, we show no impact and stuff like that, and they come up with a design. Then afterwards, we hire a new architect. They come up with a different concept for a building and a site layout that changes all that. Then essentially we restart that process again. So rather than,
Do it twice.
yeah, rather than risk the money for that, would rather wait, knowing that we can't make the stormwater worse. So it's part of the design where we gotta look at the building and the site and stuff like that. Keep an eye on those things that are there, and then, you know, that stormwater and traffic, I think, are our two top priorities. That's why we listed them in there. So as we're building or designing the project, we have those things in mind that will influence, you know, the architecture and site civil layouts. Dr. Miranda?
Yeah, just wondering, Sean, if we think about where we want to be by May 2024, right? When we go before town meeting again, ideally, what would we want to have in hand for that meeting in order for us to make whatever the next ask is? I would like to sort of talk through that, and sort of then we can think about, okay, given that we only have 275, what is it that we would prioritize to get us ready for that meeting?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it ties into, yeah, all these old business articles are kind of gonna lump into this overall general conversation. So, you know, for MSBA, just to give everybody kind of an update. I think at our last meeting, I updated that we had a call with MSBA. Our understanding is they're having a board meeting in December. I think it's December 14th. And come December 14th, we should know whether we've got MSBA, we're invited into their program or we're not. So that ask that you referenced, Dr. Miranda, for May is kind of dependent on whether we're invited into the program with MSBA or we're not. So, if we, you know, the operation or the path that I've been going on right now is, you know, assuming that we're not invited into MSBA, what do we want to hit in May with, you know, for progress, you know, for town meetings, so they can kind of see what we did. And what I'd like to have there is, you know, ideally an architect and an engineer on board, an OPM, and further take the conceptual study that we had, the DRA did, that we all saw on the site, and further that out a little bit more, refine it so we can have a better idea on costing. So, you know, refined architectural design, and then an OPM that can put a tighter price to that. So I think, you know, if we get invited to MSBA, there's a number of modules that we have to go through, and, you know, we'd have to see how those modules are gonna align, which I don't think we'd be able to hit the module for funding. You know, we have to form a project team, get everybody selected, and then go for funding for a schematic design. And I'm not sure that would align well to have all that done for May 2024. So I think probably a good thing to do, just on that note, while I was talking it out, is, you know, look at that overall project schedule that I have, look at the anticipated schedule for MSBA, assuming we got accepted in December, and kind of see how it aligns with our May town meeting or our follow-on town meetings from there. Yeah, Carrie.
For the OPM, is part of the scope of work them helping us figure out the parallel path of, because I think that would play into it too, right?
That's gonna be one of the first asks of them,
Okay,
to take the program where we're at now with the middle school site, you know, all that pre-work that MSBA would have us do.
Yeah.
Have them look at that and say, you know, if we just kept progressing on the way we're doing, you know, assuming we get all our funding in line and everything, what does that path look like, and what's the overall end cost, like the life cost of that project? And then similarly, if we get accepted to MSBA, as I've been saying the whole time, does it make sense to go into their program with the reimbursement rate and do that out? So that whole financial analysis that I've talked about a long time is, I'm actually very happy we're getting an OPM on board, because we can turn them loose for that as like their very first task.
right.
So for the architectural one, you know, for me, I think I'm looking more towards, you know, something that we're aware, you know, that I think is more deliberate to say, come May, we want to have a refined design for what we already have and an OPM with a price that they can get behind for us. And then if we get accepted to MSBA, we would kind of refine things come January, February when we do that. So that makes sense to everybody. I'm just stating it aloud. Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and I just want to echo Selena's question. I think it's the right one because it affects everything. I also want to say I agree with the strategy we've been going down based upon your kind of suggestion here, Sean, which is that, you know, we should focus on what we can control, which is our path forward without MSBA, while not closing the door on that. But we obviously, you know, don't get to pick whether or not we're in MSBA or not. They will tell us, and so that creates a little bit of a mess here for us in how we're moving forward. But you know, I think we've all been moving forward assuming we're not going to get MSBA again, and you know, hoping we're proven wrong here. But that's like the best path forward in my mind as it relates to the timeline. And you know, as it relates to like what we want to get done by May, you know, I'm in agreement with you, and maybe that is you know, maybe I'm even more hopeful than you are, but obviously there is urgent need for the space. And, you know, my hope would be that we have enough information, ideally in May, to go back to the town and say, hey, we spent the last 12 months working on this. Here's the updated information. Here's the some updated plan for the school. Here's the cost. We'd like the funding to build the school. That in my mind would be the ideal scenario here to push this project that is much needed forward with as much speed as we can, get that funding, and then from there kind of continue obviously to refine design and plans, which will take a good bit of time beyond that. But you know, anything less than I think that goal is obviously, you know, slow playing this slightly, and you know, that might be an unrealistic goal, but I think it's one that as a committee we should try and reach, and use all levers we have at our disposal to reach. And if it doesn't quite work out because MSBA delays us, or because architect procurement lags, and you know, their designs lag, and you know, there are all kinds of reasonable reasons why we might not be able to make that timeline. But I think that is a rigorous goal we should set for ourselves in order to kind of get off of this 7-year timeline that kind of was originally shared with town meeting, and try and shrink that as much as humanly possible. As my personal thoughts.
Sean, you might not have the answer to this. I'm just curious. Do we have any idea, have you have any gauge on the support you have at town meeting for us paying for a new school outright?
I would base it, so,
It
yeah.
just seems like a big fight to me. That's why I'm curious if it's been
Yeah, I
discussed, maybe.
yeah, I think
off
it's,
record.
yeah, I think it's just indicative of the land swap, you know what I mean? So, you know, the land swap was probably the biggest hurdle initially for this project.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about funding it fully. The town of Milton paying for a new school as opposed to getting 48% reimbursement from MSBA. Do we know?
Oh, you're talking the either
Yes.
or? No.
We just don't know yet.
Yeah, I mean, that end, so what you're asking, just for people that.
'Cause I think that's gonna be a bigger fight than we're anticipating. I don't, Mike might know better than I would that, but I know in the past doing schools, that's the amount of money that whatever municipality you're working with has to spend is the big issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, your guess is as good as mine, on that, although it is for debt exclusion. If we're outside of where we are right now, it's a 2/3 vote, and that's, you know, 2/3 is always a heavy lift.
Mhm.
Town meeting.
Yeah, and Mark, you hand raised?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, again, it's a fair question. I think it's just a matter of like at the end of the day, MSBA will select us or they won't select us. And then if they don't select us, I think we give the town the opportunity to say yay or nay, and do everything we can to put it in front of them. And if the town doesn't want the building, doesn't want to spend the money at this point in time, then that's what the town does. And then we got to keep moving forward with that direction in mind and see how we update our plans or whatever to make our application MSBA stronger for next year. But my understanding is, we really get one bite of the apple for MSBA here. And then if we miss it, then we miss it. But at the same time, we know the town has tasked us, 5 years ago at this point with building a school, and 2/3 of town voted to approve a site for the school. So I think at this point, my thought and my direction forward is that the town wants a school, and our job is to do everything we can to bring them a plan for one. And then at that point in time, they'll have another crack at telling us that they want it or they don't at that point.
And Mike?
Yeah, and Mark, just so I got your idea here, is your thought that if we don't get MSB funding in December, then we should be prepared in May to seek the full funding for the school? Is that where you're headed? Or?
I certainly defer to the committee here to make a decision as a collective here, but I'll also state that I think that's probably a rigorous goal based on timeline for architects and things like that and community engagement. But yeah, I mean, I think that would obvious in my mind, that is the ideal, to move as quickly as possible to provide educational facilities for the kids who are currently being underserved in the current conditions, and doing anything short of kind of that next opportunity, which is really our next crack at it. And in my mind, it seems like every year we'll have like essentially 2 cracks at this. We'll have the spring and then we'll have the fall or winter, to try and get this funding or this approval. And so every time that comes around, my thought is like, we should be doing whatever we can to make that happen for the kids and for the town. That's my thought. And certainly, if we don't quite make it in May, that at least well positions us for the next crack, which will be whatever, October, November, December of next year, whenever I guess the next town meeting is.
All right, Dr. Marina?
Yes, so if I follow Mark's thinking, which I do commend, and I think it's a worthwhile exercise for us to engage in, thinking that if we want to be ready by May, to say, look, this is what it's going to cost. This is what we need in order to have that new school. Did we then shortchange ourselves in terms of the amount that we asked of money? Because gets us back to the discussion we were having the last meeting, that we did not factor in what we would truly need in order to be ready by spring, to say this is the actual cost. Because even if we retain architectural services now, we don't have enough, from everything I've heard, to be able to get a design that is, I guess, complete enough for us to really know what it would cost us. Is that fair to say, or not?
Yeah, it's tough. So, part of what we're all talking about right now for this is essentially what's called, when you go the MSBA route or any project route, it's a feasibility study. So, looking at everything, and typically for MSBA or the architects and OPMs that they have at that point, they're starting from true scratch. They don't have land, they don't have an educational program. There's a lot of upfront work working with the town, defining all those things and finding a site for it. So as I said a number of times, all the work that we've done as a committee over the past 5 years, we have land, we have a program. So we've got a head start on this, quote unquote feasibility study that we're doing. So I think what we're asking an architect to do, is to come onto a site that we have defined. We have a conceptual layout on that site. if they agreed with it, take it, further it and stuff like that. And then similarly for an OPM to take that conceptual design and push it forward. So as I start, talking through these things and thinking about it, I've gone through, I've got the numbers from MSBA that I can present for everybody for architect and OPM costs for a feasibility study. But again, those numbers, when you look at them, you have to keep in mind that they're starting from scratch, just onboarding, getting familiar with the town, doing everything. Whereas, we've greased the skids pretty well, that these people can hit the ground running with the program and a site that's already determined. So, when you guys, want, I can kind of bring up those numbers and show them, just so you can kind of see ballpark, what those costs would be. And Marcus, he's still have your hand raised, so I can just call on you and then I can share that stuff if you want.
No, why don't you go ahead and share that? I mean, my short answer is like, yeah, we probably don't have enough money as we talked about last time to do it. But I think you sharing the numbers would be informative for me.
Yep. So MSBA, I'll zoom in on these a little bit for everyone too. So MSBA lists out their project costs that are there. What I tried to do is run through and find comparable projects that are out there. So the two on the left, Chicopee and Wachusett, are a little remote, so those costs are lower, but they have about the same enrollment size, and square footage size is a little bit bigger, at least for Chicopee. The Chelsea, Situate, and I think this is Braintree. It's hard to see in the, there we go. Yeah, this is Braintree. Looking at the costs of all these, so as you run down them, they give a breakdown for designer costs that are there. So basically, total designer fees are ranging between 7 and 4.5 to 5 million. And then that was just for a designer, architect, engineer, and then the OPM fees are roughly $2 to $3 million. But when you break those down, you just look at the feasibility portion of them, feasibility study. So for an architect, we're looking at somewhere around $600,000 to $700,000 to conduct the feasibility study. Again, from zero, starting at scratch. The OPM costs on there vary between 300,000 down to 150. So overall, I think for a feasibility study, again, if we were starting from complete scratch, we're about 900,000 for it. How much we save because we have a program defined for a site and a conceptual layout of the building, I think there's savings in that. So I don't think we would need to be that high at 900,000. And then, this doesn't give any indication on schedule of duration of how long it's taken these, but we've definitely saved whatever that schedule that they would typically use. We definitely saved, I would say, a third of it just by the work that we've already done. So, for me, looking at these things, just kind of speaking aloud, I think the ask would be, what would be that remainder duration? Is it 6 months? Is it 8 months or whatever that is? What's that overall budget? And then look at what the burn rate would be for that. And I haven't got that deep into it. I did email DRA to find out their intended duration or schedule. But I think we need that to determine, however much we have left over for an architect out of that 275,000, is it enough that would get us to May for a feasibility study for, what we have budgeted? And then if we got additional funding in May, complete that out further for, a bigger, the full project ask at some point in the future, because I don't think we would have it defined enough to go to town meeting for, that, large of an ask for that big of a budget without a really defined conceptual design and overall feasibility study. So that's my kind of take. So I'll turn it over, see if anybody has any questions. Lots of smiles. It's,
But
yeah,
if we, from an architectural standpoint, I guess I'm still trying to understand the scope of what we're asking people to do, because I'm wondering if you can, you know, at least from an architectural standpoint, you know, get not a little bit better than what we have now.
Yep.
Not get into the MEPs, but just have something that can be presented along with the timeline and budget of what it takes to get there.
yeah,
So that you can, because I do actually think this is another parallel path that we have to take. I think it's absolutely crucial that we start on architectural hand in hand with the OPM,
Yep.
quite frankly.
Yep.
So I'm trying to figure out, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, it's $34,375 a month. What can we do with that to split it
Yep.
between OPM and architectural? I don't know. I'm just, like I said, I think scope is really what's holding me up right now personally.
yeah, the point of holding on the MEP stuff, at least in those feasibility studies, when they do the costing of that stuff, they typically just do it by square foot of a
Right.
building. You know what I mean? They're not
Yeah.
getting into every sprinkler head, every light and stuff like that. It's not defined. And that's kind of the scoping thing. You know, the reason I keep bringing up architectural services when we meet is we need to define exactly what that ask is gonna be. So that's where we're leaning on people with previous experience, you guys.
You need a good set of schematic design drawings, that's what you need.
Yeah.
That's the word.
Yep.
That's what you tell the architect, we need schematic design.
Mhm.
MEP, you're just identifying systems at this point, it's a narrative, in other words.
Correct. Yep.
They'll write up a narrative, we'll present that with, that'll say, we'll do this system here, this system there. Maybe approximate cost, maybe not, we ask for it, but that's pretty much what you need at this stage
Yep.
to present.
Do you think we're asking for that, or we're asking for more than that, based on our
I don't
discussion?
think we need to ask for more than that at this point.
Yeah.
If that leaves you with money left over, great.
With your experience, how much would that be? Would it fit into this 275 budget?
It should be more than that, so I actually think, if you're just doing schematic and a narrative, it should be less.
Yeah.
You should have some money left over.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
especially, I don't know who we're working with, but if we end up working with the DRA, who we've worked with in the past, I think you get a little bit of a return
yep.
customer price from them on that, you know? Because if they're doing the schematic, if DRA does the schematic design, they're gonna be anticipating getting the final design, unless something catastrophic happens between the owner and the architect. which
Correct. Well, that's,
I don't anticipate.
and that's kind of what I mentioned previously of the way the contract would be set up is they would be doing schematic design or feasibility study, however we want to call it. And that would lead into the overall, like, once we're awarded full funding for the overall project, that would just lead into them going, you know, from the architect for schematic design all the way into the architect of
And
record.
even in MSBA projects, typically, not always, but typically, the firm that does these schematic design studies ends up staying on as the architect. It's very rare that they go in another direction.
And again, those numbers that I was presenting were MSBA numbers. So again, with MSBA, within each module, there's a lot of paperwork, meetings and stuff like that, that would probably inflate those numbers and make them higher. Where again, for us, having a site, having an educational program, having the size of the enrollment that we're looking at for the whole thing already kind of
It's a great
defined,
point.
that we
That's
can,
gonna cut your
that we
costs.
can just hand over to them saying, here's the site, you get 7.8 acres. We need a road, a building to house this many students. Here's a conceptual design that we've already got out there. If you like it, adopt it, build off of it. If you don't like it, come up with another option. But here's the cost that we need you to keep within, and then just have them, you know, operate within that cost until May.
Now,
So,
would we have them design to the MSBA?
no,
Okay,
because if we were doing that, we're assuming that MSBA hasn't accepted us.
okay,
So we would kind of be on our own path at that point.
okay.
That's basically my
Just because I know
foundation is,
MSBA will not allow us to
yeah.
go
Well,
too far outside of the current
yes,
enrollment.
yeah,
So I'm just curious.
yeah, so, I'll get to Mike and Mark in a second, but for some of those things that are there, you know, for some of this work, if we get accepted to MSBA and we've got additional work that we've done on the site, to be able to hand that over to an architect, like say we have to revert and redo everything because we went with MSBA, to hand these things over to a design team so that, again, not starting from scratch and have like a head start on the project, I think is gonna be welcomed and help us overall too. So while sometimes I talked about is like if we went with the OPM or we went with an architect and we had to revert back,
Yeah.
it's truly not throwing everything away and starting from scratch. And I mean, we'll have some feeder work that we can provide to them. Mike, you had any hand raised?
Thanks, Sean. And I understand that the work that's been done so far will save time and money, but in terms of the next ask, is it fair to say that we'll know more about what the next ask is on December 14th, when we know whether we're accepted with MSBA? Is that?
Yeah, I think for, you know, for that, I think that's our next big decision point in this project. You know what I mean? If we're accepted to MSBA, you know, we'll want to rely on the OPM to kind of do that financial analysis to tell us which way to go. And then, you know, if we end up going with MSBA, that kind of dictates our timeline of, you know, what modules we're in, how fast we can get through them and align them with our town meetings so that we get the approvals we need. Or if it totally doesn't align for them, you know, we reach out to you guys at the select board and, you know, ask you to potentially hold a special town meeting just to keep the process rolling and stuff like that. So as I mentioned, I think what I want to do is take that overall timeline schedule that I presented earlier and just start looking, you know, we can talk to the people in MSBA to say, if we are selected, you know, what is the schedule for some of these modules that we're looking at, and then start populating that into just for like a longer view on some of the stuff we're doing. That schedule essentially has been helpful for these initial things going on for, you know, site walkthrough with the OPM, getting our responses in and just kind of having a visual where we're at on the overall project. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, to Mike's question, what's the next ask? In my mind, you know, and part of the conversation we started having last week, the next ask is potentially the December town meeting, right? And that was the discussion we started is there a warrant article that we want to propose as it relates to trying to secure some additional funds through, you know, whatever sources kind of the town is indicating would be best, whether it's free cash or capital project reserves or, you know, a small debt vote. I don't know, whatever those things are. And I leave that to more experienced members of our team than I. But, you know, I think the thing I worry about is, as I said before, we get very limited bites of the apple as it relates to funding. And this is one of them. And, you know, we just heard from, you know, Sean, what the comparable fund, you know, costs were as it relates to feasibility study. And maybe we say, hey, we're in a better spot and we have this close relationship with DRA and we have these things done. And so it won't be quite that much. But I think it would be a bold assumption to assume 225 would get us that far, or as far as we would need in order to meet at least my personal goal of like hoping that we could have some type of more robust plan for to come in from town meeting in May for full funding. I think we need more, or at least should try to see if we can secure more funding for the architectural services in this opportunity in order to make sure we feel a little bit more confident about our options kind of as we move forward for the next 6 months. Yeah, anyways, that is my personal thought as to, again, how it kind of connects to us potentially putting forward some type of warrant article and seeing if we can get some more funding.
When is the warrant article due, Mike?
Tomorrow. I mean, the warrant's supposed to close tomorrow. So, you know, that's, yeah. And frankly, this hasn't really been raised. So I think that would be a challenge, you know, I mean, doesn't mean challenges can't be overcome. But I think that would be a challenge at this point, because I think whenever you go in, you know, it goes without saying, we need a clearly defined ask for a clearly defined amount of money and a clearly defined funding source. And I'm not sure we have those yet. And if we don't have them yet, that would be a challenge.
So that's item F under old business that we're talking about. So if we wanna dive into this and have the conversation.
I can offer some words that the F may stand for, but I won't.
I'll make sure to hold that spot on the agenda then. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, this one for me, you know, I'm looking for input from the committee on it. You know, there is a certain amount of funding that we have now. We're gonna expend a certain amount of that or come to a contractual agreement with an OPM. Whatever is left over from that amount that's there, I mean, that amount hasn't been determined yet because we haven't selected an OPM and executed a contract with them. Whatever remainder is left out of that, we can use for architectural services and then use that to kind of get us to May, to a point that potentially we could ask for a larger amount of funding in May to really push, you know, the architectural services along. This is again, under the premise we're not going in with MSBA because that'll, you know, change everything. So the question or the framework more for this discussion is, do we think we have enough money to burn, you know, I call it burn because we use that term in engineering, a burn rate per month, to last until May or July, actually, because that's when our funding would get replenished. Or, as Mark mentioned, do we ask for more money? And if we're asking for more money, we have to be specific, as Mike mentioned, how much we're asking for, and then exactly what we're gonna be using that for, and probably not as general as we were last time. And we could rely on the information we have from MSBA's OPM and architectural services to say, hey, we're only a percentage of what that is right now for a feasibility study. And that's our rationale why we need more money. But we kind of make that decision pretty quick. So.
I think, go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just gonna say, Sean, I think engineers stole the term burn rate from finance people, but so nothing substantive.
All right.
I think there may be a middle ground here. What if we go with what Glenn mentioned? What we really need now is a schematic plan. We limit the scope of what we want to what we need now, so that what we have we can pay for it. And we use that knowing that we're going two parallel paths. We may be lucky come December or whenever MSB adopts.
And I probably should have defined schematic design. When I say schematic design, I mean, we have a comprehensive site plan. We have floor plans, we have elevations. In best case, we even have a rendering or two, showing the public what it's gonna look like. That's important. But that's all you really need at this point.
If that's all we need, then maybe
To
that's
spend more money beyond that, to something you don't even know if it's gonna get approved.
Yep.
Right now, you're a salesman, Sean, I hate to put it that way, but you need to sell this thing, right? This is kind of,
I know.
as our leader, you're kind of taking on that role that you need to sell this project to the town of Milton, and, so that's what we gotta prepare for,
I think you need a render.
yeah, you need to render. I hinted at it, but
Yeah.
you need to render.
There's no doubt in my mind. People were
Which isn't a
asking
huge-
for
yeah.
it at the last town meeting.
It's not a huge cost.
They
by the
wanna
way,
see
anyway.
what it is that's being,
I hate to say it, but I outsource renderings all the time. I never would do it before, but this past year I just started doing it because it's so easy. It's really not too
correct.
expensive.
Yeah.
So,
Mark, you have a hand up?
Yeah, just I'm sorry, I'm on my phone, so I'm not hearing it as well, not being in person. But Glenn, are you saying that you believe that 275 is enough to kind of get us to that schematic design?
should be. I mean,
Make sure you speak up because he wasn't hearing.
yeah, no, it should be, but I think that's a discussion we should have with TRA, assuming we go in that
Yeah, I
direction.
mean, I completely agree with you. I don't think we want to we don't want to over design something that ultimately doesn't get built and waste funds. So I'm completely in agreement with you on that. And if we need to change designs, we want to be as lean as possible. We want it to be as meaty as possible. So we'll give people details so they can intelligently vote on the project. It's what is that line, and what is the amount of money that gets us there. And I'm concerned that 275 is not enough between both an architect and an OPM, which is my thought is that we asking for, again, I do not have an exact number in hand. I don't know if any of us, there's no magic number here where we
I tend to
say,
think,
hey, 150 is it, 200 is it, 300 is it.
Sean, I'll make some
But that's what I want to figure out, like, what is the thing that we feel.
I think this is in Glenn's wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Why don't you make some contact?
Yeah, I want to make some inquiries to people I know still working for firms, just to find out what this type of study is going for.
Well, what
this day.
Yeah, I think the way to frame it is, show them the site plan that we have.
Yeah.
No?
No, I was just thinking,
Okay.
yes.
Oh.
Show them the site plan we have.
Yeah, all right. I was like, okay.
I tell them schematic, when I say, schematic design plans, elevations, site plan, which they're not doing the site plan anyway.
Mhm.
So that's not even gonna be in that cost, where we already have a site plan, so made by others, so that wouldn't even be in the cost anyway. And find out what that would be around.
And then just to jump in, I mean, the other 2 points Mike raised was, what is the reason for the ask and what is the avenue for us to receive funding, right? And Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think obviously, if we are able to nail down a number, we are very clear on like what the reason for the ask is and what that dollar amount we are expecting it will get us to, which is a schematic design that we can present to the town in May, right? That is the goal that we are trying to achieve by asking for any additional funds. And then the avenue of like where the funds are, again, I think I shared a couple different options of defer to others what it might be, but obviously there's the free cash whenever that gets certified here and then next few months, or there's you could do we could do the debt request that obviously requires 2/3, and so that's the issue with that. So I'd be in favor of doing a free cash request if that is an option, but again, it all depends on if we even need the money. And I certainly would love, just to be on the record, would love to not need more money and be able to do it with this amount. I just would hate to miss our opportunity to ask for it within the time frame where we can, because we're not getting another opportunity for 6 more months, and that's another half of the year we've now, don't want to say wasted, but essentially wasted, to kind of do right by kids.
Yeah, Dr. Moreno.
So, Mike, this question is to you. When would we need to have all that figured out in order to be able to go before town meeting in December?
Well,
You said
technically,
tomorrow, but
yeah, technically, the warrant closes tomorrow. It is not atypical for the warrant to be reopened at times. But my concern here is there hasn't been any real discussion of this among the select board or warrant committee, and so it hasn't been floated yet. So doesn't mean you can't do it. All right, doesn't mean you can't go to the select board in October and say, hey, look, we need this for XYZ reasons, and we'd like you to open the warrant and do it. And the reason, we now understand, maybe at that point there'll be an understanding about free cash. I'm not aware of where we are on free cash, but maybe at that point there will be, and so that could lead to a reason. But warrant committee needs time to review things, and, you know, you have to respect their schedule. So, so that's a long way of saying not ideal, but possible.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, if sort of we work backwards from there, like if there is another window, when is that window? And what do we need to do to prepare ourselves if that's the path we want to go? And if we feel like we can make a strong rationale as to why we're going before them again, just because I know that sort of going back to a conversation we were having the last time we met around money, we sort of felt like we didn't know enough. But it sounds like, it's still up in the air, and there may be a case that we can make. And if so, I think Glenn, thank you for offering to look further into the numbers so that we can have a very specific ask, because I think that becomes very important. We can't just go by sort of what we know, intuitively based on the numbers that we've reviewed, et cetera. We need to be very specific and very clear. Otherwise, it's just not going to go. So just, trying to get the sense of that, just as I think about Sean, everything else that you're juggling and all these different, timing things that they keep moving, that the clearer we are as to when we need to figure, when we have the next opportunity to go before the warrant committee, I think is important.
So our next meeting, I was just looking at it, is Monday, October 16th. So, internally for us, even if we were to develop something, we could call our own meeting earlier than that, but like kind of based on our schedule right now, that would be our earliest. Yeah, Mike?
No, I mean, if there's any idea about doing something in September, then that's got to really be accelerated, because I don't have committed to memory what the schedule for the warrant is, but I think it goes to print sometime in early November, and again, you want to give the warrant committee some time. So I would say if there's any idea about December, we can't wait till October 16th.
Yep, and that was the exact reason why I was mentioning it there too. So ideally it would be something by the end of the week. So we'd have to have another meeting this week with, the holiday following, or next week, but ideally this week. The only other thing I think of too, and Mike, this is more, for you, procedurally, could we put one on there, and if we find we don't need it, just pull it? But again, I'm just trying to think of, ways that, we're on the warrant and we're ready to go while we're still doing some of this stuff, and we realize we don't need it, we pull the article and make everyone's life a lot easier. But
yeah, so if it's on the warrant, then the procedure would be to ask for it to be referred back for further study.
yeah,
And then you'd have a vote on that.
So Glenn, how quickly do you think you could get?
I'm writing it right now. I'm reaching out to people. Yeah, no, we'll try to get it fast.
Okay.
The people I'm asking this, they should know pretty quick.
Yeah, so just to be clear, this would be supplemental funding for us for architectural services to get us to July 2024. Because essentially, I think our anticipation is, even if we go for funding in December, we would still need to go for additional funding in May to kind of ride out the remainder of that overall, true design that we're doing. Is that in line with what you were anticipating, Mark?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, again, that probably is a more reasonable timeline, to be fair. The Maytown meeting to have a final design and get a vote on a, 60, 80, however many $1 million construction project is probably a little tight. But it's certainly something I'd like to see if we can strive for. I mean, I've certainly done 100% construction drawings in, 6 months. 7 months, and so to do some feasibility thing in 4.5 or whatever it is, shouldn't be impossible.
So just to put some framework into this too, is, we're throwing around the terms feasibility, schematic design, and stuff like that. I think what the ask would be is the supplemental funding for feasibility study, as Glenn was saying, of like floor plan, site plan, rendering, some elevations. We would be looking at that for May. But the follow-on, it's in the MSBA process as schematic design, which takes that feasibility study and then runs with it further and further refines it. That costs obviously much more money than the feasibility study that we're doing. So I think, the supplemental funding we're looking at is to carry us, from January, call it January to July next year. But we would need additional funding in May to do that schematic design basically from July on. And I think that ask for what the costs of that are gonna be is gonna trigger a separate action in May. So it kind of goes back to the overall thing of, if we think we have enough money that we can ride between January and July for this feasibility study and not have to ask for funding in December, I think that's the way we go, and we need to prove that to ourselves that we have that funding, and if we don't, we have to make that ask. But I think in May, the ask is gonna be for a larger amount of money to do that schematic and almost final design, similar to what the fire station building committee did when they did their project. Mike?
I hesitate to say this, but there's another potential variable here, and that is, it is not unprecedented to have another town meeting, a short town meeting in February. And I believe the fire station, we did some supplemental funding, or we did a February town meeting for some fire station funding at some point. So, the risk there is goodwill with town meeting members. By calling them out of their homes in wintry and cold February. But anyway, so that's another, possibility that is not certainly unprecedented.
Yeah, that's what we did last year for Fun Pond, so.
Not sure we want to call people out 2 Februarys in a row, but all right.
So, as it relates, just kind of getting back to the agenda a bit, as it relates to the funding article, I think, I'll be in contact with everybody. I'll relay what Glenn finds out. And then if we need to have another meeting, just, I'll message everybody that, for this week to be aware that we might have to have a meeting to kind of discuss this and possibly vote on it, if that works for everybody. So just keep your radar up.
Should we preempt and for the open meeting law, just put a date so that we have the 7 days time?
I'm fine with that. Yeah, 3 days, or 48 hours, 2 days.
Whatever it is. So that
It's tough on the Monday meetings, but we gotta have it by Thursday in there. So it's like we're doing Friday. If we want, I'm not sure of people's schedule, but Thursday or Friday, we could potentially do. So, for now, do want to just figure out.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Okay, which day, Thursday or Friday?
So I can't do either.
Hey, Sean, Scott's in the attendee list, just FYI.
Yeah, I'll pull him in. He mentioned he was gonna be late. I'll have to make sure.
Friday would work better for me, but I could do either.
Depends on the time on Friday. I have to
Yeah.
bring somebody to get his permit at 3:50 on Friday, and can't miss that.
Gotcha,
Friday works better.
Friday.
What time, I'm sorry, Sean, what time Friday?
We haven't set a time, so,
During the day, right?
yep.
Yeah, I should be able to squeeze in during the day.
So we did lunchtime at Friday.
Yeah,
noon.
something like that would work.
And this would be a one item agenda meeting.
Yeah, it would probably be a little more discussion and stuff like that, but we can do that. So, So in the room, Carrie, Friday at noon,
I'm just checking my calendar right now.
Aqua, Friday.
Could we do 1 o'clock? I have a 12 to 1 meeting. I cannot move, but I could do 10 to 12 or 1 and beyond. Just that 12 to 1 slot.
Nope, that's fine. So 1 PM, good for you, Aqua?
I have a meeting I can cancel, yeah, it's good for me.
Okay,
That should work.
1. I can probably check my schedule. Hey Scott, how are you?
Obviously, that's from my current calendar.
Good, Sean, thanks.
It's changed,
Yeah. Yeah, my Fridays are typically open, so I'm good anytime.
Carrie, does the 1 o'clock work for the permit? Schedule?
I'm just gonna have to leave. So
Oh,
if we start at 1, I don't know how long it's gonna take, but I have to
Oh, yeah,
pick
yeah.
up somebody at BC High and bring them to Brockton by
okay.
3:50, so.
Does the morning then work better for people then? Or should I just keep it Friday and then
Morning's fine for me.
coordinate a time after?
I can't think it's taking longer than.
early to get it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a couple.
9:30.
Is Friday at 11 better?
I can do that.
Friday what?
11.
That works.
All right, so let's run with Friday at 11.
Friday 11.
We don't want to limit Kerry's time in Brockton.
First permit, you gotta be there.
Yeah,
Is it the registry on Pearl Street?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Scott, is Friday morning work okay for you?
Yeah, do you think that'll be Zoom or in person?
It would probably be Zoom. Or
Okay.
similar to this, we could do it hybrid. I'm just not sure of the availability of rooms. We've scheduled this room out till the end of the year, but I'm not sure on Friday if it's available or not.
Yeah,
So-
either the 11 o'clock or the 1 o'clock slot, either one is good for me.
Okay, all right. So I'll put that together with the brief agenda and we'll dive into that on Friday. So anything else on architectural services or funding articles or anything else, just on that for like old business? So Scott, well, I assume you were hearing everything while you're in the attendees thing, so apologize. Do you have anything you want to contribute to that too, before we close it out?
No, I think I joined too late to really get the full context of it. I was only in there a couple of minutes.
Okay. All right, so I think the only other thing we had under 2 things. So we, item 4C, which is discussion update on the land swap. So as I mentioned, we had a call with EEA. It was myself, Mike Zulis, Nick Milano, and Peter Mello, and Peter McNulty. Peter McNulty and Peter Mello are both attorneys for the town with Murphy. So essentially they were town council. The meeting with the EEA went fairly well. So they had their attorneys and different representatives that were on there. We walked through kind of the process that we're doing right now. They have an online portal that hasn't been opened yet. We're probably going to be one of the first ones going through it. They've received copies of the draft legislation that we provided them. They are essentially going to provide edits or red lines to it back for discussion purposes. So we're waiting those. We were confirming with them our deliverables to them. So the things that we're issuing as the deliverables are going to be the appraisals that we're working on right now of getting contract executed to do the appraisals of all the properties, the alternative analysis that I distributed to everybody. There's no format for the alternative analysis, so that's why I kind of just went on my own. And then one of the last ones we're doing, it wasn't really clearly required, but I'm pulling requests for survey services for the parcels. So as you know, some of the parcels we had historical data on them, and we're gonna confirm it with them, but I already started the process with BSC Group today to essentially go out and do full surveys. So we'd have current stamp plans of all the properties that we're gonna include. So that's one other one that we're looking at there. So, you know, with them, they indicated their turnaround time was fairly quick, which was good. It didn't seem like it was gonna take months of review for them, mainly on two parts. They're pretty familiar with everything we're doing because we've done site walks with them and kind of kept them in the loop the entire time. So all in all, it was a good call, and, you know, nothing that I saw was, you know, negative out of it and stuff like that. Mike, I don't know if you wanna, you know, weigh in a little bit more on your take from the call with the EEA.
No, I mean, you know, it was just, they're trying to do what they need to do in order to, you know, do their review. So we gotta get them everything they need, and they'll do their review, and then it'll go from there.
Any, yeah,
Do we have to fund all these
you
things?
gotta speak up louder, so.
Do we have to fund all these things?
Fund which things?
The appraisals?
Yes.
The surveys?
Yep,
Is this all coming out of the money that we've talked about
It would.
collectively?
it would.
Okay, just wanna
Yep.
make sure that I put that on the record.
It's a good thing to kind
Yeah.
of wind in there.
275 is going away really fast.
Correct. I see Mark smiling, but he doesn't have his hand raised, so I'll leave it at that. Any other questions or anything in regards to EEA? Not hearing any. So the last thing on the old agenda, old business, is item E, discussion update of MSBA. So this one's fairly quick. We did have a call with MSBA, I think a few weeks back. We talked about it at our last meeting. They had, it was basically a follow-up to our statement of interest that we submitted. It's like their first step. The potential next one is them doing a site visit. So we're kind of waiting to see if we get contacted. So if you recall, when we were first formed, we submitted an SOI. They did that initial phone interview where they asked about the SOI. Then they came, actually it was during the pandemic. They didn't come out to the school, but they had us submit video of everything that we were doing. So our hopes is this time, if they do come out, we'll be able to walk them through the schools, give them a true, like, you know, live view of, you know, what's being experienced there. So we're still waiting for them, but I'm assuming if they're doing a board meeting in December, you know, we're coming up on October really quick. I would be anticipating that in the next couple of weeks. So, you know, if it comes up, I'll make everybody aware that happens or stuff like that. But for right now, that's kind of the update that we've got from MSBA. So open it up if anybody has any questions, comments, or anything like that. Seeing none. All right. Move on to agenda item, I think number 5 for new business. And singular item under there, school building committee OPM selection subcommittee discussion. So this one I was just bringing up. So from our last meeting, for those of you who weren't here, we voted on the formation of a subcommittee. Right now, the subcommittee is made up of 4 members of the school building committee and 4 members of the town. So from the school building committee, we have Glenn representing essentially the school building committee from a select board point of view. Mark Loring representing the school building committee from a school committee point of view. And then Scott Tereshak and Tim Lombard as the appointed members that are there. From the town, town administrator Nick Milano, the superintendent Peter Burrows, facilities manager Chris Hayden, and Chase Berkeley, the town engineer. That basically makes up the 8 people that'll be on that subcommittee. So I know Nick has reached out for like a coordination call and stuff like that. Is that right, Glenn? For,
Yeah,
I think like next week or something like that.
he asked us for a date where we can all get together.
Yeah.
I'm still a little confused as to how we're gonna receive the deliverables, like how are these proposals, we're gonna probably only have one copy of each proposal, right?
Yeah, I don't know if they're electronic or hard copy.
That's then
Yeah.
my next question. If they're electronic, we can obviously go about reviewing them on our own, but if
Yep.
they're hard copies, as they used to be, we'll have to kind of get together and.
If they're hard copies, can't be turned in electronic.
They'd have
Good.
to, they'd have to scan them all in.
Yeah,
It would be, yeah, if they're bound and stuff like that, it's a
and they'll
pain.
be bound.
Yeah. I mean, my guess is it's all gonna be electronic,
Okay.
PDF version.
So that's good information.
And I'll ask Nick about that, but that would be my assumption, and if he hasn't issued that addendum yet, I'll ask him to make it so it's all electronic.
Do we have a list of OPMs that attended the?
Yep.
Was that distributed and I just missed it?
If it wasn't, I'll send it.
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious.
Yeah, my goal, like you guys are gonna be busy the next couple of weeks, kind of, depending on how many submit,
Yeah.
just kind of sifting through that
It's a
stuff.
cool one. I'm gonna give you my take on this. There's gonna be half of them gonna be boilerplate. Don't even mention Milton other than the front cover. They just submit it to submit, and then we'll have the ones that are actually really interested in the project, and that'll narrow those down.
Yep. And Scott, you're all good for next week to start, digging into those submittals, reviewing everything?
Yeah, do we know when they're coming in?
They're due Friday.
Friday, yeah.
Yeah, so at the beginning of the call, we went through the schedule, so they're due Friday, and then our review period for that stuff or individuals reviews, should start either Friday afternoon or Monday.
Yeah, that's fine. I saw we have the meeting scheduled on the 10th for to determine the short list.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think leading up to that meeting, I think Nick's gonna look for everybody to come in with everything kind of reviewed, scored, and then, have a working group to kind of develop that short list. So appreciate you guys volunteering for that. Any questions or comments or anything on the OPM selection? All right, hearing none. Next item on the agenda are future meetings. So the future meeting, I think we're skipping a week because of the holiday, Columbus Day. So our next meeting's Monday, the 16th, potentially. Well, we're gonna have one Friday. I'll put that as a placeholder for now, and we'll cancel it if we need to. The following meeting after the 16th, a week later, is the 23rd. And if we go back to the schedule, it kind of aligns with the necessary, there's action. I think at that point, we'll have an OPM selected that we have to vote on. I believe that's what it is. And then a follow-on one, the 30th. So I'm not sure if we're gonna need to have 3 meetings a week apart of each one. So, we can talk about that probably at our 16th meeting, whether we feel the 30th is a good one to hold, or we're fine kind of revising the schedule or skipping that one based on what we do on the 23rd. So with that, let's see if anybody has any questions or anything on future meetings. Right, seeing none. All right, the last item is adjournment. So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move the motion to adjourn.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All right, Dr. Miranda, discussion? Nope, all right. Roll call vote, Glenn Hoffman,
Yes.
Aqua Yes. Carrie Hurley,
Yes.
Mark Loring,
Yes.
Scott Tereshak,
Yes.
Dr. Miranda,
Yes.
and Mike Zulus,
Yes, good night, everyone.
and Sean O'Rourke. Yes, thank you. And
Have a good night.
have a good night.